Hey everybody, Edo here, and I am excited because I have Kirk Dennison on the phone, or on Skype, whatever. Say hello, Kirk.
Hi, Ed.
And this video is going to post after you go live with your new Kickstarter, but we're filming it a few days before. But that Kickstarter is Rurik, Stone, and Blade, which I'm sure you're excited about. And we were just talking, and there's a lot of like little interesting things about Rurik and its journey. And even like learning about some of them now I had totally not been aware of. So what I thought would be interesting is like, why don't we start back a little bit, pre-Rurik Kickstarter, with a quick overview on how the game came together, who the designer is, etc. And then let's roll into that campaign, which was pretty darn successful, and then how things have come to this point. But why don't we start there, and then we can pull it all together.
Sounds great. So prior to Rurik, for those who might not be familiar with myself or Peacekeeper Games, we had, like many project creators, what you would call a pretty humble first campaign that, if I look at it, Flag Dash, our first game, it was a fun game, but it's not like it was earth-shattering. Or it was a game. I learned a lot through it. I
But you
liked the
also
game a
you
lot.
signed a big deal with that, didn't you? You
I
got
did.
like I remember that was the first time we interacted. It was like, oh, somebody made a capture the flag board game or card game, whatever. Little capture the flag thing. It was cute, but it was like a Kickstarter indie type of thing.
Right.
And then I want to say, what's the name of that company?
Ultra Pro.
Ultra Pro. It was like, and Ultra Pro is publishing. It was like, what? So you have the small campaign, and then you have that deal, right?
Yeah, they approached us at BGGCon right after we sold our last few copies of the game and wanted to license it, and they did a larger print run than we did. And for this, that, or the other, I don't know, I can't speak to all of it. They were handling marketing and manufacturing at that point. It didn't do super well for them, and it ended up turning into more of a liquidated product. But nonetheless, a lot of people got the game in their hands. They did a 10,000 unit print run. We only
Holy
did
moly!
1,000 to start with. So, but nonetheless, that was still kind of fun to be able to work with a larger entity. I love their card sleeves, for example. So they gave me a gift pack of a lot of card sleeves. I got a pick and some, what was it? If I can find them here. They basically said I could pick from their accessories. This is like a welcome to the Ultra Pro family gift. And I got these perfectly weighted metal dice. I just keep them by my desk and just kind of mess with them during conference calls because they're really fun and they're in a magnetic case. It's just a total tchotchke that I would never buy on my own, but they're like, pick whatever you want. And at their booth, it was like, all right, I'll take these random things. They're like, are you sure? And they're like, yeah. I felt like I was being wined and dined. It was fun.
Well, and then they printed 10,000 copies, which is pretty amazing.
Right.
Okay, and so you do that, and then and that's a light, small, little game with
Yeah, that
cool
was a small
meeples with
game.
flags, right? But like, Rurik is
Right.
not that, right? Rurik is this behemoth. So
Right.
what's then the journey to Rurik? Yep, there it is.
So this is the reprinted version, which is a little bit larger than Codename's box size. Then our second game was called Gearworks.
Oh, that's
This
right.
is
You did
also
Gearworks too. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
also one that I designed and then published. This is more of like a Sudoku meets steampunk. Same size box as Flag Dash. I decided quickly if Ultra Pro is going to print in this size and there's lots of copies in existence, let's make them the exact same
Sure,
size. Sure.
sure.
Then
Well, and
go ahead.
Gearworks, I mean, that sort of fits from my experience because I recently interviewed Chet Elkins. What is like a typical independent Kickstarter creator path? You have this first thing that's sort of weird and interesting and sort of very novel, and maybe the execution, has some interesting bits but needs some work. Then you have your
Right.
second title. It's more streamlined. The mechanics are more like clear. It's a little bit more in the sweet spot of like what people are expecting in from the board gamer group. Um,
Yes.
and then you keep stepping upwards.
So we made the switch towards what I would say was a good product. Flag Dash, I think it's a good game. I didn't make it a good product because the art was a mismatch with what the level of strategy was in the game.
Sure.
People see the art and think light family game when it's a no luck strategy game with some outguessing. You can play it with kids, but I probably should have put people in army fatigues, for example, as the artwork, GI Joe, etc. Gearworks was oozing a puzzly strategy vibe, and it turned off people that didn't want that type of game. But the nice thing was it was kind of a self-selection thing. You'd actually, if you're doing games not as a full-time job, you actually want people to screen themselves from buying your game if they're going to hate it, because then they're going to post negative things about your game online,
sure.
and it's not helpful.
And that's a topic in and of itself. I really think people like don't understand the value of clear messaging and marketing. It is way more valuable to have a ton of people who really want, like, and then receive what they expected than, you know, trying to have a broader campaign but then having that mismatch.
Right. Yeah, those games that they're both a dungeon crawl and they have a cooperative goal setting objective, and they do everything to all people, and then all of a sudden who you're really pleasing with your game. Some games can get away with it, but I think, yeah, you have that really tight focus. That's a whole separate topic for itself. You're going to achieve better results. I think the results spoke for itself, is that Flag Dash was a 6.2 where it landed on Board Game Geek by the time the dust settled. Gearworks was a 7.0 after 300 ratings, and then Rurik, not my design, which is why it's a better game, because I'm only an average designer. It's a 7.8 after 800 ratings. So we have been able to hone our focus more. So the ramp up was, we had a little game. Hey, that was fun. Let's make another game. I came up with the game on the fly. Gearworks came together in like 5 weeks, my fastest game design ever. But since that time, I've had 0 original ideas that came to full fruition since then. So it just a stroke of luck, and you can't repeat that all the time. We saw Rurik about the same time we were coming up with Gearworks, and I told Stan Kordonsky, the designer, who lives about an hour away from me. We were at a designer meetup, and I said, this game looks really interesting. It's too big for our
brand,
our line of games. Yeah. But I played it with him, and I couldn't stop thinking about this novel mechanic in the game that we ended up calling auction programming. It's basically weighted worker placement, and what I mean by weighted is that all workers are not created equal, and there's a reverse scenario of the lower ones have faster speed, but they get less of the thing, and then the guys that are higher numbers go later, but they get more. So you're trying to sequence your actions around which things you need quickly and which things you need more of. And I couldn't stop thinking about this.
I mean, complex already, but I dig it.
Right. So if you know Flag Dash, it's almost like you put Flag Dash and it's planning on steroids, where you take those tokens with the cards. But nonetheless, I said, hey, probably not going to be able to. I didn't even say probably. I said, this is not a game I would publish. I didn't want to get expectations up. But I said, could I play test this and give you some feedback? And he said, oh, sure. He didn't have any publishers looking at it. And so I played it 7 times in like a 10-day window, which I don't play any game 7 times in a 10-day window. I love that game, which is playing with everyone, and couldn't stop thinking about it. So then I was like, Stan, I got to sign this game. I called him. He was so surprised. And he said, oh, I thought you were just playing it as a friend. And I was like, well, I didn't want to get your hopes up, but I was secretly thinking maybe I should give it a look. And ended up being able to go. And
to your credit, like, you know, I don't know how much you survived at the end of this, but like the execution here isn't shoddy, right? Like the result wasn't, oh, I've done these small games and let me take this big game and then do a terrible job at it. Like, as far as I can tell, admitting I haven't played it, but as far as I can tell, looking at the final execution here and the ratings and all those things, looks like you fully delivered it to its finest. Right?
Yeah, I would say it's one of our most proud moments in life of something we produce as a finished product. I could probably show a box of it later, but it's full stop on everything. I had a lot of sleepless nights, as like most publishers do, but a lot of things are out of control, but we took the time to get it right, and we were really proud with the end result.
Yeah, the art is fantastic. You have these great looking miniatures. You have the wooden tokens of varying sizes and stuff and shapes that are appropriate to the game. Like, you know, again, you have all the insert work, so you know, I'm pretty sure people who have this game, you know, have that experience of this like deluxe product in their hands. And then, oh look, you even you did a mat and you did coins. I mean, this is full on Kickstarter goodness. That campaign ended up at what, 150, 170, 172. So like really healthy, strong campaign. Okay, so you go through this process. And so, but you were mentioning there were a couple different, I don't know if controversy is the right way, but like challenges that you had with it along the way. So you play this game, you fall in love, you're like, I want to do it. You clearly work your heart out to get it to a fantastic part, and you do the Kickstarter, and it's a success. What take the story from there?
Sure. So I'll jump back a little bit into it. So there was an angle at which, with Gearworks, prior to Gearworks, so after the Ultra Pro deal, you always view things as the rose-colored glasses on yourself. I always view things as, oh, this is going to be awesome. Everything's going to be awesome. So it's like, you know what, this next game is going to be awesome. We're going to license to someone else, and then we'll make another game that's going to be awesome. But I had this thought of, let's try to make a job out of this. And when I mean a job, make a career out of it. So I had what I call my 2-year window that I brokered a deal with my wife that it was, okay, I'm going to be working on nights and weekends, a lot of hours for a couple of years. Let's pour into this and basically working 2 jobs. And at the end of the 2-year window, we will evaluate if it makes sense to make a change. And if not, I'm going to scale it back to take more time for family. And so
it's good that you had that negotiation up front as opposed to like it just being the intervention, but keep going.
Yeah, I'm very thankful that we had a very proper conversation around it. And it was helpful then when weeks were really long. It wasn't an I told you so card, but it was, hey, Emily, I know this is tough, but we got to get this job done. And we did have that discussion before, and it was always a good, this is, and I reminded her of what that date was.
You're like, here's that contract we signed.
But, I mean, similar to someone taking 2 years to do an MBA program in the evenings after work, I likened it to that. I mean, there's no way you can start up a business just from nothing. You have to either quit cold turkey or kind of do it on the side. And we
double down,
right?
Yeah.
Quit with little kids. So anyways, the lead up to it was just really, really busy. But then shortly before the campaign launched, there all of a sudden, when the game started becoming more visible, so we've been working on the game for well over a year and doing pre-marketing, taking to Origins,
sure.
Gen Con, online, lots of playtesting, things of that nature, is that, so the backdrop is the game is set in a historic kingdom from the 11th century. It existed in Eastern Europe prior to the formation of most of the Eastern European countries. So when you think of Eastern Europe, of course, you got Russia on the map that just takes up half the map over here. But then if you kind of go west from Russia, there's a slew of countries that over the years the shapes changed based on different rulers and annexing and things like that. But anyways, Ukraine is the primary land area, modern day Ukraine, with some parts of Russia. There's some parts of Bulgaria, and then you got a couple other countries over to the side that had some play into this historical time period.
You're saying this area of Kiev is what you're describing right now.
Correct. So this area in Eastern Europe was prior to these countries existing. So almost like when you can think about Jerusalem being contested area today and it's a hot topic, this area is Eastern Europe's hot topic of who has the ancestral claim to these lands. And I'm not trying to get into saying who's right. I mean, it firmly is Ukraine's land today, but the time period in which we were sitting, it was Kiev and Rus. It was a loose confederation of sorts of nomadic tribes that.
It sounds like you've learned yourself up on this topic.
Oh yeah,
Keep
loose
going.
federation of people that they were just kind of in different provinces and they ran their own ships. They at one point allowed for Vikings from Norway to come in, or Scandinavia to come in, and they said they basically wanted them for protection. So they ceded ruling titles to these individuals. They ended up being known as princes, and then there was a grand prince of Kiev that all the other provincial princes would defer leadership to the one in Kiev. So they were there to be the strong arms for the people, and so that's where the name Rurik comes from. He was the first person who was put in a position of leadership in this area back a couple hundred years prior to the setting of this game, and then his descendants and their line ruled this Kiev and Rus area until its demise when the Mongols destroyed it in the 13th century.
So just to be specific before you go on, so like when your game is called Rurik, Dawn of Kiev, like you're very clearly speaking of a moment in time.
Correct. Yes,
which I wouldn't have known, but I appreciate that other people might know that.
Yeah, the naming process was actually kind of interesting. So trying to get names that when you search on Google and all those other things that you're going to get hits, but make it also memorable. A lot of people said, why do you do that colon with the name at the end? A good example you got in the background, Clank. That's a game. That game name technically is Clank, a deck building adventure. I noticed a trend that there were lots of games that used a singular word with another word at the end.
And that's true in mobile games as well. It's for search optimization. Absolutely.
And people call it the first word, though. So people rarely tell me, hey, I like Rurik, Dawn of Kiev. They say, hey, I like Rurik. And so it worked out well. We got Kiev, so you knew Rurik meant nothing to anyone unless you were a Magic the Gathering player. Or, no, it's not Magic. It's a D&D. I guess there's a D&D character named Rurik from some book, I guess. But beyond that, Rurik meant nothing to people. So Kiev was in there to help put the...
Sure. Okay,
place.
but so let's get back to the controversy. So
Sorry.
you've explained
Sure. So the controversy was, so Stan is from Russia. He grew up in Russia, and we also worked with some people of Ukraine descent. So the primary illustrator in the game, Yaroslav Radecki, lives in Ukraine. So we had individuals that were involved in creating the game from the ground up who were both from Russia and Ukraine, modern day Russia and Ukraine, creating a game about something that is in a shared history from 800 years prior. Both of them weighed in, and I got some other insight from other people from Ukraine, other people from Russia that were saying that the way we were going was appropriate and respectful and all this. And so I felt like I was not doing any sort of cultural misappropriation, but rather we were paying people from those cultures to contribute to the game in a meaningful way and leaning on them for direction and guidance. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, right before the campaign starts, I think it was like 2 days prior, and so 2018, there were some people from Ukraine that posted online and made a huge deal about the spelling of the word Kiev, which historically in modern English, you would spell that as K-I-E-V. But that's not the script that Kiev is written in there. So almost they think about Arabic, the script looks very, very different than English. It's not like Italian or Spanish to English where you have some shared characters. The issue comes to play that Ukraine and Russia have a very troubled past, a lot of fighting, and there's a lot of atrocities.
And troubled current. I mean, troubled.
Yep.
Sure.
But the issue came to play is people thought we were taking a pro-Russian centric narrative and trying to demean Ukraine's history. Now, there was nothing with any of the literature or any of the marketing anywhere. It was just because we used the spelling K-I-E-V, sure, which is the English transliteration, not a translation. English transliteration, which means it's like a sounds-like approach to taking a word that's in a different script. It's more closely resembling the Russian spelling of there. But in reality, if you go back to the 11th century, it was a script that was not Ukrainian, was not Russian, and it actually would most closely transliterate to K-I-E-V, but because people in the present tense only know what their history tells them, it was a big issue to them. But we didn't even know this was a hot pocket that we were stepping on. So basically we got a whole host of people, they probably posted on some websites, that came out and hated the game, rating it a 1. I got some death threats out of it, I'm not making that up, and a lot of people just spewing really negative things right before the campaign started, and as the campaign was starting on the Kickstarter page, getting just lambasted with this. And so it's one thing if you know that something's about to happen, but this was completely out of left field.
Well, so you learn about the cultural significance of how something's written, and then what did you just weather the storm? Did you make any changes? Like what was next?
We dug into that and tried to figure out. So in all due respect I refer to modern day Ukraine and Kiev with K-Y-I-V, which is how they want it to be spelled. But we wanted to be true to the past and reflect the game as it was there, which it was not Russia, it was not Ukraine. This was Kiev and Rus. So we stayed true to the wording that we put in there, and we had enough sources we reached out to that knew the history and the language, and we felt good about taking the position that this was a true representation of the culture at the time. Our game was not meant to be a history lesson. It was instead designed to just evoke some of the culture of this region. And we got enough support from some people that live in Ukraine that said, we appreciate the light you're shedding on our culture, and we don't have a problem with it. Don't pay any attention to these people that are taking offense at this. It was interesting, and you fast forward 2 years here, even in our country, and there's more of this. People are upsetting people just based on the words they use, and I kind of feel like I lived through something similar 2 years ago with another country's political subject matter of their time.
Well, it's a super sensitive matter, and I know that. I mean, both for all there's the cultural misappropriation part about it, which is much more about a white dude making a game about a culture
Aztecs.
That's not or Russians and Ukrainians, but the fact that you're like, well, except that the designer's Russian and the artist is Ukrainian, right? And I'm part of the crew, but it's not just so.
Right.
But that's one half, and the other half is just really specific cultural issues. I had a similar. I did a video on some of the things around it, and to some extent, if you're a game maker and this stuff sort of makes you uncomfortable, like just make a game
Fantasy
with
world.
sci-fi and aliens, right? But I had an interesting thing. So we did the 100 Tori,
Right.
and up front we're very sensitive about this, and we hired a historian from Japan to be part of it, and also worked with a lot of people. Just sent out reviews and copies to people to play who were Japanese natives. And one of the guys we sent it to was like an editor for like the national newspaper. And I don't know, like this was like I didn't have this context. Somebody else was like, "Oh, I got my friend. He works at like I forget the name of the Asahi Shimbun or whatever the name of the whatever it was." And not that it was a national, just like like the equivalent to like the New York Times or the Washington Post or whatever. And in the back of the rule book for Tori, we have like 4 pages just about Japan and anything that's in the game and sort of represent about it. And there's this section where the person who did the subject matter expert wrote this little thing about, oh, and this type of flower can be found in these islands north of Japan, and so like whatever they're flowers from this island north of Japan. Well, and I'm not remembering 100% correctly, but it was if I'm not mistaken, it was also a thing with Russia. But basically, the guy who was the writing the newspaper, he's like, hey, I think we named the islands. And he was like, hey, like there's a big dispute right now over the naming of those islands and who owns them. And like Russia thinks one thing and Japan thinks another, or it might have been Korea or China. I don't remember who the argument was. I'd have to go back to my emails. But basically it was like, I wouldn't use this name. This name right now is like makes people angry. Just call it a group of islands and you'd be fine. And so we changed it to a group of islands. But it's that kind of thing where,
Right.
There's a lot of sensitivities in other countries. I don't know what the equivalent, there's lots of things in the States you'd be like, oh, don't call it that. You're going to just like be running into like a lot of, I don't know if you want to call that pop or soda. Be careful. That's
Right. I mean, I think you could say the same thing in the U.S. related to any Civil War figures, since that's
sure.
been a more recent example for us, is that some people think that certain figures are worth talking about today, and some people think you shouldn't praise people that had any slaves, etc.
Right. Yeah. I mean, those are really like yes.
So that might be the good example.
I was trying to think of something that was a little bit more
tame,
subtle. Well, not tame. It's just that like yeah, I guess it's an American thing to not be able to peer into other countries. I don't know how much other countries know about U.S. history, right? But like, it's just the same of not knowing the significance or the little details. So anyway,
so it'd be like someone in another country making a Western themed movie or board game, and they don't know enough about John Wayne and characters like that.
Yeah, or misspelled his name, right, or something like that. Who knows?
Yeah.
But so but I do think it's good to understand these as two things. One is this idea of interacting, engaging with other countries, other cultural regions and significance, and paying it the right respect by involving folks who are from that region, who understand it, who have expertise in it. And then there's even when you're doing that, there's still every opportunity in a game that's historic to cast a light on a character one way or another. And it's time period based. Like with Hamilton, 10 years ago, it wasn't the same reaction to Hamilton as today, and times and perspectives are changing, right? But we will keep moving for a second. So that was just one of the things that came up, right? So then you proceeded to so it was successfully funded. How the manufacturing go in the process, getting it to Kickstarter backers, was that pretty straightforward? Did you hit any bumps there?
A lot of bumps on manufacturing the plastic trays, and this led to no shortage of mental anguish. And actually, I did a whole podcast recording with Gabe Barrett that'll come out here soon, talking about a journey of dealing with major depression in the last couple of years with that. But it wasn't because of the manufacturing, but the manufacturing was in the midst of me dealing with depression, so it was kind of like kicking someone when they're down. It was like,
Oh yeah, it's hard to deal with those problems.
So the main thing is we had a really good modeler, Dan Cunningham, who did the trays just recently for Role Player Adventures as well. If you're looking for someone to work with on plastic trays, Dan Cunningham is your guy. He's a product engineer for Fiskars, for example, the orange scissors company. Great guy, really collaborative. But anyways, the manufacturers when you work with plastic trays with manufacturers, the manufacturer rarely makes it themselves. They usually have another source they work with. And in our case, what it seemed like was the manufacturer understood what we wanted, but somewhere it was lost in translation with what was passed on to their source. And we had way more iterations than you would usually expect in trying to get them to go back to this, that, and the other. The end product was great, but to get there was quite a few nights of pulling out my hair, trying to communicate through someone with English as second language that was then communicating in Chinese. And I'm not trying to fault anyone. It's just sometimes difficult. Things get lost in translation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of challenges when you're dealing. I mean, very often, modern board game manufacturer is not making everything that they put in your box. They're sourcing a lot of stuff, and it's not, people aren't surprised that people source paper. Of course, they source the paper. They're not a tree factory. They're not a paper factory, but no, they're probably also sourcing the meeples. They're probably also sourcing the dice. They're probably only printing the cardboard and the paper and getting everything else for you.
And doing the assembly there.
Yeah, and doing the assembly. So there is a lot, and different manufacturers do different things, but there's a lot of that process, and it can be challenging, and you're always forced into the position where they say, hey, okay, so we've done this 3 times now. Can we not send it to you the next time and just send you pictures? Or can we just print and then just show you it right before it comes out of the box? And even recently with the Whatnot cabinet, there was a change we wanted to make on the print, and I'm in good shape on the schedule, but it was like, hey, we could just skip this step of sending you this 3rd version and get started, or if you want, we'll wait the 10 more days, but that's going to delay you 10 days. And boy, it's tempting. I was like, yeah, you know what? Maybe I should just skip. And I slept on. I'm like, forget it. Just send me the thing. I'll wait the 10 days. I looked at my schedule. I'm still on track. Let me just see it, because I'll kick myself if I mess things up. But so
it's a good point you brought that up. The same thing happened with cards, for example. They asked us if we wanted to skip a step on proofing something, and I said, no, I want it. So glad I did, because the cards we got were not what the sample had showed before, and we had to switch. And that was it was a smaller debacle. I knew how to control that. Plastic trays were harder to control, though, but I understand and can appreciate the tendency that it's easy to want to say, oh, just sure, move on.
And because everyone wants to keep on schedule. All right, so you get manufacturing, the game hits the shelves, and as from a rating perspective, it's been well received. You're doing a Kickstarter for the second print, so did it? Presumably it's sold out, or has it been a success for you guys in that regard?
It's been successful. We did 0 marketing for the game after it came out in November of 2019 for a retail release. I decided at that point, games wasn't my career. I was doing my day job and just trying to just do life, and it was like, oh, that's nice. We did that thing in the past, and so I did virtually 0 marketing that I had not already queued up. I did 1 or 2 videos for John Gets Games, and I'd done an official how to play video, but I did nothing. So the game did whatever it did in distribution. We did end up selling out in distribution, but it wasn't a really big print run. It's an expensive game, so from distribution, that's a hard sell for a smaller publisher. But the game continued to get better and better ratings, and at the same time, we were approached by a larger publisher to actually license it, and so that sounded pretty good. So,
and you mean license it when you're talking in this regard? You mean within the United States, basically take
worldwide.
over? Okay, worldwide. But when I license the French edition of Herbaceous, I'm not sort of seceding being the publisher. When you're in this regard, they would take over publishing the game. That kind of license, right?
So similar to what we did with Flag Dash the first time around. The difference was with Flag Dash, we had no localizations at that point. So then Ultra Pro did have all the languages. We had several localizations of Rurik in place. So when we negotiated this, it was, well, you can have worldwide rights to everything except all the languages that we already gave those rights away, it's normal.
Sure.
But we licensed it to a much larger publisher who was pretty excited about it, and we had charted out a course for, okay, let's make an expansion, and we'll do a reprint plus expansion Kickstarter in the spring of 2020. Of course, COVID happened, and that schedule got bumped back a bit, and it eventually got to the point where COVID was disrupting their schedule enough that everything was getting so strung out that Rurik was going to be difficult to fit in a timely fashion. And so there's a bit of a burning hole in your pocket as a creator when you have something that's done and ready to go and you can't do anything with it. And that was the main reason we self-published Flag Dash. We had the game mechanically ready to go, and it's like, oh, I could try pitching it everywhere, or I can just make it. And so that was the thought here. It's like, all right, I got the license back. So we did this.
So I mean, that's a non-trivial thing here. So basically, just to recap, a publisher you have a contract. They're going to proceed with the product. You're working together in preparation for a spring Kickstarter. They're like, you know what? We can't fit it into our schedule anymore, or we can, but it's a 2022 game or something like that.
Right.
And then I forget what the name of the clause is, but like in most licensing deals, there's a time frame in which you have to execute the license or you lose it. Was that sort of how you guys amicably resolved it, or was it more just a conversation you had?
There were some timing factors. According to the letter of the law and our agreement, they could have made it work, but it would have been at the expense of the game's success. So we amicably agreed that it just made sense to sign a cancellation to the deal, which was stand up of them that they didn't drag it out and make the game be just in no man's land for a while. I mean, the bigger thing was that, so this company planned, and I get it, they wanted to time the release announcement to build their marketing steam, and it was about the time that COVID hit that they were going to announce it. So the announcement was about to happen but never happened. So then to go at this point where I'd not been announcing anything about an expansion publicly because that wasn't my card to play, to then have this no man's land of what are we doing with this, there was a lot of pent-up questions of, is there going to be, we heard about an expansion, is it happening, when's it happening? And that was difficult to figure out. How can you not say anything for an extended period of time? So we had this game basically finished in April, and we got the license back after talking about it at the end of June, and then I was like, all right, let's make it work. So then we queued up an August 31st Kickstarter for it, with me having done zero marketing or zero manufacturing prep with it prior to then, because that was what that entity was going to do. And I don't fault them for anything. The way their project was lining up, they had plenty of time to do that, but then COVID changed everything. So then I got to put on all those old hats of do everything. Whereas the agreement was such that we were going to let me manage design development, art direction, rulebook. And so I work with Stan, the designer. Stan's a great designer, and we came up with a really solid expansion for the game with whatever constraints that the partner was interested in and what we wanted to add to the game mechanically. And I proceeded with all the artwork, and then we got the game back. So here we are. I'm barking up the tree again that I didn't think I was going to go do more plastic tray manufacturing, but I don't like letting a project remain unfinished.
Well, yeah. Well, and so right. So this is this interesting thing, and it certainly looks to be as robust. You gave me access to the page a little early, but I mean, people are going to be able to see it. But it absolutely looks as robust as the original. And then, so this is a Kickstarter, a reprint and expansion campaign. So presumably. You'll get back all those folks who like the original game, but then also the opportunity to say, well, hey, if you wanted this game, now it's available again, back it on Kickstarter. You don't have to have the headache with the first game. I mean, presumably the manufacturer can just stamp some more of them.
Yeah, that's easy.
And maybe since you'll annotate your tray diagramming a little bit to avoid the same problems.
I think there's a trust issue there, meaning that their partner didn't realize that we knew how to make complex trays, whereas Dan knows how to make complex trays, and I think they understand that now. So.
Yeah, these are definitely complex trays. Wow, I'm looking at you. You have that animation of the whole thing, like doing the accordion
expanding.
Thing. Yeah. Cool. And so. We sort of breezed over that period in which you were sort of down and out and depressed and sort of figuring things out. And I know a little bit more about that. But, you're back in the saddle. You're doing another campaign. The game's fantastic. The game's been well received. You've already been through the title controversy. So, hopefully it's a little less stressful. But, there's any opportunity to learn to find out why it's going to be stressful. Are you, and we haven't spoken about it, but there's Jetbacker and the things you do over there. But do you see this as sort of, this product's in great shape, we love it, we want to bring it to market, and that's sort of the extent of me like dipping back into this? Or is it a little bit more like, maybe it's going to work, and maybe I dip back in it and I do another 2-year negotiation with my wife? Like, where are you landing in that category?
It's a great question. I've been reminding myself of this verbally out loud with people. It's kind of like a verbal commitment to it. I don't want myself to be thinking this could become a career, because that would sabotage my thinking at my current job, which I enjoy working for my current employer, my boss. And I also want more time with my younger kids. Right. So I say all this on record here before the campaign starts. My objective is just to let this remain its hobby thing. We don't have any other games queued up, so it's not like if you're trying to make a publishing company, you've got at least another idea you're working on. We have 0 ideas. We're just taking one thing at a time.
Sure. Well, that's certainly a way to ensure that you don't have anything else to do. No, but I mean, I certainly appreciate wanting to bring something to life. I mean, you know, I'm about to actually, in the next 2-3 weeks, ship out the expanded deluxe edition of Liftoff, Get Me Off This Planet, which was my first Kickstarter.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and, you know, it had solo, another player, and all these other exit points. And it's actually an expansion that we started, like, right when the game finished, right? Which is, like, 5 or 6 years ago. And it's just been one of those items, you know, the game was underwater, it was too, like, it wasn't a game I could ever reprint. And it was a game that was well received, but like it wasn't a hit, right? And so, but it was always just sitting there. The design was done, this was done, and so, you know, I got to the point where I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do this deluxe edition. We're gonna put it out there. It's gonna basically be a Kickstarter. Like, this isn't a game I'm gonna go print a ton of. I'll print enough for the backers. I'll print some extras, but like, it was much more about, why am I sitting on all this done work that people could be enjoying and playing, versus like, no, sure, Liftoff is back and it's going to be the next big gigantic thing. It was more like, well, you know, let's do it. So I'm excited for folks to get that, but I do appreciate that sort of like, even though I have other Kickstarters and stuff going on, but just that idea of like, there's this thing that wants to exist, so let's do the effort to make it exist, right?
Yeah, I think most creators at the end of the day, although money does factor in if it is your job, we create because we like to create, and that's just reality. Whether it's building Lego models or painting, people that like to create something, that's just like a burning desire. They have to do it.
Right. Well, you know, I'm sure there was an evolutionary need for people to want to create, and there's some gene in there and some chemicals that spark while it goes on. But anyway, yeah, man, I certainly hope by the time this video posts, which will be Tuesday, you're launching on Monday, that you've had a great first day, funded or well on your way. And, you know, it's a very clean campaign with lots of good reviews of the original title, so I think that'll be fine. Were there any other interesting tidbits you wanted to check in before we close out?
Let me think here. Yeah, it's been an interesting ride, and for anyone that's out there that ever wants to ask questions about anything we talked about, happy to answer. In particular, that conversation that we both discussed, the difficulty with names, is a really touchy subject, and so if anyone ever needs guidance, not that I have all the answers, but I'm always happy to be a listening ear for something like that.
Yeah, and I do think, if I might add one last point, like, resist the urge to be defensive, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Hey, you did something that put you in a territory that was unexpected, or a word choice, or there's something in your game that is you know, has a cultural significance you weren't aware of. Like, don't double middle finger that. Like, learn about it, engage it, understand it, see what you can do the research to say, no, we feel this is actually correct. I mean, there's a lot of, I think there's an initial gut reaction to be angry at being called out on something, but like, I think that's the wrong reaction. I think the reaction should just be openness and willingness to understand the perspectives, and then, you know, maybe you make some changes, maybe you don't, but just being angry probably doesn't help you much.
And one thing, and to that point, that's helpful, I think, is most times if people are put off by something, they don't know your heart, they don't know what you did, they just see the end result, and they might assume based on what they experienced before. So what we did, we had to come up with a very polished statement on what our position was, and basically trying to say, we're not trying to present something in a way that you think it is. This is what we're doing, and we were consistent in that messaging. And then I think the messaging eventually got across. It was helped them by our Ukrainian publisher, Mag, actually published the game, and it's been well received in Ukraine. So now there is a Ukrainian edition with the spelling of their language and their own script.
Well, so you missed that. That was a good punchline, man. I'm glad we stayed on for the extra 2 minutes. Like, that's the part you didn't. that actually you now have a Ukraine edition with the spelling that's appropriate to that audience, right?
And it's in a script that I couldn't handwrite it. Like I wouldn't know it, just like I can't write Mandarin, same type of thing.
Sure,
so.
sure.
So that's been fun to see kind of that be resolved, and you get messages that I see on Instagram that are in Ukraine. I can't read it, so I press the translate button, and people are generally positive. So I like that came to a good resolution, and we just made sure that in the expansion name we put all English words.
Oh yeah, it's Rurik Sword and Blades, right?
Stone and Blade, yeah.
Sorry, Stone. Stone and Blades. All right. Thanks for being on. Thanks everyone for watching, and best of luck.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it.
Hey everybody, Edo here, and thanks for watching Gaming with Edo. Reviews over here on this playlist, League and Insider videos over here on this one. Subscribe, share, all that good stuff. But most importantly, play some great games. Thanks.